All right, so I've pulled the paper back from both sides of your wedges. What you want to do now is bring out your toilet paper tube. Again, make sure it's painted black. And then what I do is I take one of the wedges and just sort of hold it over the toilet paper roll itself, just to kind of get an idea of how deep I wanted to go with this, to start making the steps. So once you get it to the depth you like if you want to make it slightly more of a narrow staircase, you can do that. Just keep in mind there won't be as much room. What I end up doing is just sort of cutting off about maybe 3/4 of an inch worth to the tip of it. Nice thing is though, since it's the foam board, you just sort of wiggle around and then you're going to end up with a nice little half circle or half moon shape on the other side, and I use that as my guide for how I'm going to cut off the edges of all the wedges. And you do want it to have that slight curvature to it, so that when it comes time to gluing it to the toilet paper roll, it'll hold more snugly to it. So take your knife and then just go through and carefully cut that shape out so that you get the little curvature there. This one, if you want to kind of just rub it a little bit with either an emery board, your own hand, whatever it is you choose, you can do that just so it's a little bit more smooth on the inside. Again, it's not necessary though, and you're going to have a whole bunch of these little cheese-sized wedges left over where you can obviously save them for something else if you want. But at this point, what you want to do is basically just take your now trimmed edge and take it to the other ones and use that as sort of your template for cutting off that little curve that you want from the rest of your stair wedges. So I'm going to finish doing all of those, and then I'll show you how I do the tile work for the stairs. Okay, so I've cut out the curve to all of my wedges for the stairs. Next step for this is you want to add in your tile work detail to these. So all you really need to make sure you have is your ballpoint pen. And then what I do is I just end up drawing a line down the center of the wedge to get things going. And, you know, again, 2 or 3 times down with it just to make a nice deeper groove with it. Also, you don't need to worry about it being perfectly straight. You can see this one has a little bit of a dip to it. But again, these are all details that give it more of that aged look of stone as opposed to something perfectly cut and pristine looking. The next thing you want to do is then just take it so that you sort of do 2 offset lines running perpendicular to your original one. And you want to make sure you note how you've done this, because you're going to make sure you're drawing every step so that it looks the same way as your first one. Reason being is that you'll have the offset action working its way up as you go up the staircase with this. So you want to make sure you do the exact same pattern to all of your steps as you go around. Again, make sure you use your ballpoint pen and go through with a couple of passes, at least 2 or 3 for each of the lines you make, so you get those nice deep ridges. But the other thing you want to make sure you do is you take those to your edges as well and just bring that line around, because what that's going to do is make it look more like actual stonework. So you get like that little groove on the side, so it looks more realistic. And it does really make a difference when you take that little bit of an extra step to do that with these pieces. So I'm going to go through, get the rest of my staircase steps all taken care of. And again, you want to make sure it's all done the same way as your first pattern of lines, so that you get the back and forth of the grout lines as opposed to everything looking exactly like each other, carbon copy line after carbon copy line, because it's going to get to be too angular and too linear looking as opposed to a natural look. So I'm going to get this taken care of, and then we'll pick back up with the next step. So I finished up doing all of the stair steps, and I actually cut out 3 additional ones, just using some scrap foam board and using just one of the wedges as a template instead. So you want to do the same thing to these as you did with the base. You want to take your brush, or you can do tinfoil. There are a whole bunch of different techniques that you've seen or you can come across that work really well. I just personally prefer to use this brush technique. So I just go to the steps and I kind of just beat them up to give them that aged look. So you just want to go around. It does not have to be exactly the same on all of them. The wear is going to be different, and that's actually good, because then they look a little bit more unique around each other. And again, you know, give a few of them like scuff marks by just dragging the brush across. You don't have to do it to all of them because then it starts looking a little bit too repetitive, but just do it to a few of them and you'll get a really neat effect when it comes time to putting your black wash on these. So now that you have all of your steps cut, you want to make sure your glue gun's ready. I have my handy little yellow guy here. And you're going to want to go back to having that base that you just finished earlier. And you also want to make sure you have your toilet paper tube. So what you want to do now is I will put some of the hot glue around that open circle area. And you want to make sure it's on there so that there's a decent sized bead because this is what your toilet paper roll is going to first grab onto before you start putting the steps on. So take that and kind of line it up over that circle area and then just make sure you kind of wiggle it in. I give it a little bit of an extra press again to make sure it's secure, and as you can see it's a little bit more obvious that it's offset. Now here's the fun part to this. You can actually stuff your scraps and everything into the tube. It's what I do. I'm going to take all of that peeled off paper and just fill up the toilet paper tube just to kind of give it more of a firm feeling to it and to reinforce it a little bit. So just take all that paper and just shove it down in there. If you want to give it some weight, you could always put in a couple washers in there in the very base to get started before you glue on the toilet paper roll itself, since you do have it marked where that circle is. So again, I'm just taking up all of that crazy scrap paper I just pulled off and just pushing it into the bottom and pressing it down a little bit so it stays put a little bit better. You don't have to fill it up all the way. I just find that having just that little bit helps keep it more secure. So that's just something to keep in mind and have in there as you work around. So what you're going to do now is you want to get your steps started. So what you want to do is turn it so that you have sort of the shorter edge of the base on your right hand side and the longer is to your left, because you're going to start placing your staircase steps working from the left and swirling your way up. So what I try and do is, you might find a few of your wedges are a little bit wider than the other ones, so try and start first with your wide edges. What you're going to do is you are going to, for your first stair, you want to make sure you put a bead of hot glue along that curved edge, and then you also want to be sure that since this is going to be gluing to the very base, you want to get some hot glue going on the underside of your stairs. Then very carefully what you're going to do is just get that first step pushed in against the toilet paper tube, and I definitely recommend that you let this cool before you start working on the next step, because you want this to be secure. You don't want it shimming around on you and shifting around on you. So I find it takes maybe about a minute's time for that to happen. So just be patient with this and let it do its thing. And once it's, cooled off a little bit and more secure, which is starting to happen here, thankfully, you then want to go to your next step. And when you work on your next step, again, try and find one of your wider wedges if you can visually see them. And you're going to do the same thing with that rounded edge that goes up against the toilet paper roll, but you're only going to do the rounded edge, and then you're only going to do a line of hot glue on the edge that's going to lip over the base stair. So put the glue on the edge, and then you put that bead of glue just on the bottom, just a fine little line of the hot glue, and then you take it back to your toilet paper roll and you want to get it so it lines up. And if you get some of the hot glue like trailing down, that's okay, it's going to get covered later on. But again, you just press it up against the toilet paper roll, but then you also want to have it so that it lips over just a little bit. You can see, it's maybe like 1/4 of an inch if you want to get technical about it, but just that little lip helps give the next stair a little bit more integrity as it goes up around the toilet paper roll. Again, give this just a little bit of time to cool off before you start working around, because what you don't want to do is start working on it too quickly, and then it's going to start dipping and pushing itself down rather than staying where you initially put it. So really what you want to do at this point is put on maybe a couple more steps And then I'll show you the next thing I like to do to get the brickwork started. So I'm going to just put on a couple more. Make sure I grab a larger piece. And again, just put it on that rounded edge that goes against the toilet paper roll, and then just along the bottom of where the steps are going to meet each other. And give them time to cool so that way everything's staying in place. And forewarning, you are going to have lots of trails of glue gun glue, so you want to just, as it bugs you, you can peel it away. Or you can try and leave it to the very end and just kind of get all that sticky webbing away from your work. So at this point, what I've done, I've kind of done some prep work on this to get the really neat varying sizes and rough look that you see on the finished piece. What I've done is I've just taken my scrap pieces of foam board, like all different random shapes and sizes, and I've cut little individual bricks. It is a little bit more time consuming, but the end result is way more worth it in the long run, rather than trying to wrap the tube, draw your brick on, and make it look like stone. This tends to give it more of that rougher hewn stone that I personally liked the look of. So in terms of how you make these, like I said, literally just take a scrap of foam, like these are the tips of the wedges. All I was doing was just taking it with the X-Acto knife and just cut strips of varying thicknesses. You can go super thin, you can go super thick, that's completely up to you. But it ends up creating your little bits of brick for you. And they're consistent height-wise because you're basically using the natural thickness of the foam board itself. So what you do once you get your brick started is go back to your glue gun, pick up your toilet paper roll and your steps as they're getting going, and I just run maybe about a 2-inch length worth of hot glue, and then I'll start picking up the pieces of my foam board brick, and I will push it up against the glue. And again, these don't have to be uniform. In fact, the less uniform they are, the more brick-like they look, for old world brickwork, if you will. So what you're going to do is just keep going around, again, about 2 inches in length of the hot glue, and then stick on another brick. I will say, if you have a piece that's slightly thicker, make sure your glue is thicker at that point. Otherwise, it will sort of pop off itself, and that just turns into a huge headache. So you're going to work around. You don't want to make this too high as you go around with the steps, because it'll get harder to work these things. You could even technically start with a step, then do the brickwork. Start with the next step, do more brickwork. Because the steps are the same thickness as the brickwork, you could work layer by layer if you wanted to. But for me, I'm just going to go around again and just keep adding more of the bricks as it goes around. So I'll do a couple more so you can see how it starts looking. And then what I'll do is sort of progress along a little bit so you can see how everything's building on itself. But again, you might feel more comfortable doing this one little brick at a time. You might feel more comfortable like kind of getting your stairs on first and then putting your bricks in. That's going to be up to you. Personally, I find it a little bit easier just to sort of do a little of each as you go around. And what you're going to find is when you get towards underneath here, because as you can see there's that gap right through there, I just put the hot glue directly onto the foam board brick back there, and then you can just press it into place. It doesn't have to be as pretty or as perfect. You might even need to take your pen in there just to kind of press it in and against so it catches, which is totally fine. And it's going to give you, again, the looking like bricks going around. You can see they're starting to get going with this. So I'm going to keep adding some more layers around, and you can see this starting to take shape. And I will then come back with the whole staircase pretty much completed. But little by little, you'll see this take shape, and it's actually pretty darn cool. And then you get to have fun once this is all done with doing your painting details, because to me that's like the best part of getting this all pulled together. So again, I'm just going to give it that little 2 inches worth of hot glue, and then just starting my bricks around this one. You do want to make sure that you kind of offset a little bit. You don't want them lining up perfectly because if you start having them all line up, again, it looks too